Well, thank you very much indeed for the invitation. It feels entirely appropriate that my first conference outing post-retirement is to come and talk on ageing and participation. I first got involved in work around involving older people in the early 1990s, working with a woman called Joyce Cormie, who was Development Officer for Age Concern Scotland. And Joyce and I worked together on a project called the Fife User Panels Project that involved older people who were intensive users of health and social care services. Average age, I think, was about 86. Now, as we've just heard, the sort of innovative nature of that project, going back nearly 25 years now, I mean, it is no longer particularly innovative. It's much more usual to say we should hear the voices of older people. We need to find different ways of involving them in policies and in decision making. But what we mean by involvement can actually be very different. And certainly some of the contacts that I've had with older people who have been involved is that the experience is not always a positive one, and it doesn't always lead to change. And so it's not enough to simply say, okay, there's lots of it happening, isn't that a good thing? We need to look closely at how older people can be involved in positive ways to lead to some of the positive results that our two colleagues from Northern Ireland have just indicated. So I want to talk about some more recent work that I've been involved in, again with Age Concern, then Age UK, this time in Brighton and Hove. And this was a two-stage project. First of all, research carried out by a team of older people, working with myself and colleagues to understand what well-being means to older people and how it's generated. And then what tends to be called a translational project, using the findings from that research to, in this instance, generate learning resources for those working with older people. And I want to try and highlight what my colleagues and I learned and thought was important about the way in which we tried to go about that work. And some of the impacts it had on those taking part. Okay, so the work, and I don't know to what extent academic colleagues in Belfast have a similar sort of relationship with Age Northern Ireland, but in Brighton we were lucky to develop an ongoing collaboration with the local Age Concern that became Age UK. There was a research fellow appointed in the university working under my supervision, whose initial post was established in order to carry out this collaborative research. We first of all started out working again with a colleague, a manager of the local Age Concern, to recruit a team of older people as researchers to work on collaborative projects. And they were recruited through the Age Concern volunteering programme. Now, I retired at the end of December, by which time the projects that I'm going to describe had come to an end, and the two oldest members of that team were 90. So these were the oldest old, if you like, who were actively involved in carrying out research. And as I say, what we were wanting to do, lots of talk about well-being, a whole industry of research out there researching it. We wanted to say, what does it mean to older people? How do they think it's produced? And then we wanted to try and do something with that to make a difference. One of the terms that is used nowadays in terms of describing some of the participatory initiatives is that of co-production. And we started to talk about the work we were doing as a process of co-producing knowledge. And I just want to say a bit about what that actually meant in terms of how we went about doing research, first of all, with older people. First of all, well-being. It's one of those concepts everybody thinks they know what it means, but when it comes down to it, it's really quite hard to define. Is it happiness? Is it satisfaction? Is it subjective well-being? You can find any number of different terms. So we started out by having conversations about what we thought it meant to the members of the team. We then looked at a way in which well-being is often researched using a particular measurement tool, and the team members tried out using this measurement tool, and they came back and said, don't think much of that. We don't like that measurement tool at all. We don't think the idea of measuring well-being is the right way of going about it. So we started to think about, well, how do we do this differently? We also needed to think about who we meant in terms of older people, and whilst age concern at that time, as it was working with people 50 plus, the team members were very clear that that was much too young, and that we needed to have 65 as the lowest age to be included in the research. In fact, the people we researched were aged between 67 and 97. So the older team members were very influential in shaping who we researched. Having abandoned the measurement tool, we then worked out from our discussion about what we thought well-being might be, how we might design an interview schedule to go and talk, use to go and talk to people. And the older members of the team went out and undertook interviews, which were understood as a process not of collecting data, but as generating knowledge together through the interview process. Those of you who've done research will know that actually the hard part is not actually collecting the data, it's making sense of it when you've actually got it. And so we wanted also to find ways of actually involving the older team members in the process of making sense of what people had told us. And again, this was a process of talking together. First of all, talking together about responses to what people had said, what had struck people, what they thought was important. And out of those discussions, developing something that researchers will often use, which is a coding frame. And again, the older members of the team went off and they actually applied this coding frame to interview transcripts, and then brought the results of that back for more discussion amongst the team. So all the time, lots of talking, lots of active involvement, lots of doing and talking amongst the team as a whole. And then saying, well, okay, who's this research for? And yes, we need to produce a research report at the end of the day, but it's really also important that we produce something that's going to be useful to older people. So as well as a research report, they produced, the older team members produced a document called As Time Goes By, which was deliberately targeted at older people. Okay. Now I just want to look in a bit more detail at some of that process that I've just described, because this was a team that involved a group of older people, an age concern manager and 2 university researchers. And as university researchers, we came to this project with certain knowledge, certain understanding about not only other research, but about theory. That's sort of ways of coming up with explanations for things. Why are things happening in the way they are? And rather than just sort of saying, well, okay, we're going to hand over the responsibility to older people to determine what this all means, we think we have got something to offer to the team in order to help them make sense of the data that we've generated. And the particular body of work that we wanted to introduce to the team members was work on an ethic of care. Now, I don't have time to go into the details of that body of work, but just very briefly to say that it starts from a recognition of our interdependence, that we all need care to survive, to grow, and to be well. So rather than emphasising independence, the ethics of care starts from the notion of independence and the importance of caring relationships. And because care is something that's important to all of us, none of us would be here if we hadn't been cared for as babies and as children. We all need care throughout our lives. You shouldn't actually think of care as only relevant to a particular group of needy individuals. And rather than thinking of care as a quality of the individual who gives care, you should think about care as a relational practice, something in which both caregiver and care receiver are actively involved. So that was the work that we were drawing on. And we actually gave a seminar on this to the team members. We were pretty convinced that this was a useful body of work, but we wanted to share it with the members of the team and say, does this make sense to you? And we set up a seminar in the university for the members of the team, as we might have done with a group of students. And we discussed and we debated it. And team members said, yep, we like that, we will work with that. And what that did was help us all have a framework within which we could look at what people had said during the course of the interviews. But it did something else as well. It sensitised us, the university researchers and the age concern manager. It sensitised us to the importance of relational ethics in working with the older co-researchers. That we were able to apply this way of thinking to researching with older people. So we started talking about researching with care with older people. And we used the analysis of care that comes out of this body of work, the dimensions of care. We applied this to the research process. So the first dimension is that of attentiveness. We needed to be attentive, to attend to the differences between the members of the team we were working with, to what their needs were, what practical support needs they might have in order to take part as researchers in this project. The second dimension is responsibility. And we had to balance our responsibility for getting the job done, for producing the research, with our responsibility to be attentive to the needs of our co-researchers. We had to ensure competent organisation to meet both the aim of involvement and the aim of the research. And the fourth dimension of care that is identified is that of responsiveness, which actually refers to how people respond to receiving care. In this instance, we needed to be aware of the way in which older people in the team were responding to the process of being involved as researchers. And in one case, that actually became very important when one woman became really quite upset about the story she was hearing, and we needed to be very alert to that experience. So our approach was one in which we were trying to, if you like, model some of the ethical practices that the ethics of care suggests. When it came to analysing the research data, and I haven't got time, and it's not my purpose this afternoon to actually present findings to you. One of the things that was very evident was the centrality of relationships to well-being. When people were asked, what does well-being mean to you? How is it produced? They talked about a whole range of different sorts of relationships, whether that be friends, family, neighbours, but also strangers, people they met in the street, encountered in shops, and service providers. They talked about their relationships with place, both their home and their wider environment. So relationships were really important, and care was really important. And that included both people's ambivalence about receiving care, sense that they should learn not to be a burden, what experiencing good care meant to them. Care is an expression of valuing the other. But they also talked about themselves as caregivers and the importance of reciprocity, the recognition that they gain from giving care, the problems of the expectations and demands that caregiving can present. So at the end of the research, as I say, we had a research report, Wellbeing in Old Age, Findings from Participatory Research, and we had a document as time goes by, Thoughts on Wellbeing in Later Years, that was produced for older people, which are accessible on the university's website. You can get access to those if you're interested. But as I say, we had started off by saying, okay, this is all very interesting, but we actually want to try and do something with this. And we were successful in getting funding from the Economic and Social Research Council for this translational project in order to try and influence practice. So, this is the next part of what I want to talk about, the next stage of these two linked projects. And because we'd had to apply for funding, we set out our aims in relation to what this project was. KEOPEC, you always have to come up with some sort of acronym that's going to knowledge exchange with older people and an ethic of care is what it stands for, but no dear. Anyway, we wanted to contribute to the development of ethical and effective practices in relation to older people's decision-making about care and support services. And we wanted to enhance the dignity and respect experienced by older people in their relationship with services, and in turn to enhance well-being. Nothing if not ambitious. And our specific objectives in order to do this were to bring together a group with research, practice and experiential knowledge to build a dialogue, to try and work as we had started to work in a way that models what we were trying to achieve. So working in that way which, through the way in which we worked together, was capable of generating well-being, and to produce practical outputs, practice guidance, training materials to be used in social care and social work education. And we, being particularly ambitious, we decided they were going to be films. They were. So at this point, we're not perhaps so much co-producing as co-applying knowledge. And the notion of knowledge exchange that we started with is one that requires recognition of the value and necessity of different types of knowledge. So we were talking about substantive knowledge of well-being in older age. What have we learned? What do we know about what well-being means and how it's produced? It was a methodological knowledge and experience of participative research. What have we learned about how working together with older people can produce good results? But we also wanted to bring into this process practitioner knowledge. We wanted to engage with practitioners. We wanted them to feel that this was made sense to them, it was relevant to them, and that they could contribute their own knowledge to it. We were still saying we actually think some of our theoretical insights and knowledge on care ethics was important. And as I say, we wanted to continue to work in a way that was ethical and participative in producing the outputs that we were looking for. Now, because we had funding, ESRC funding for this project, we were operating to quite a time limit. We had funding for a year. We had been working on the wellbeing research for 3 years. We were terrified. When we sat down and thought, what have we actually got to do in this year? It really was quite challenging. But we stuck with it and said, okay, we need to start off by recruiting a team. We need to share what we think we already know amongst that team. We need to, from the mass of material that we have generated through the research, actually come up with a doable project. We need a particular focus that's actually going to be useful to practitioners, which is going to reflect findings from the research. So we needed to identify relevant material from the mass of material that we had. And we needed to find a way of enabling those who were coming new to this project, the practitioners, to engage with the material that the older co-researchers were really by this time quite familiar with. So we talked about imaginative engagement in small groups where people were talking about what we'd learned and trying to explore it. But as I say, we wanted to make a film. None of us had ever made a film before. So we, in order to make the film, we had to first of all identify somebody who knew about making films, a film producer who actually understood what it was we wanted to achieve. And we were lucky in being able to find locally a young man who produced training films, who we met with, and he came and met with the team and they clicked, and that was really important that they clicked. Having identified the foci, what were the issues that we thought we wanted to make these films about, that were going to say something about well-being and what was the relationship between different sorts of practice and well-being, we decided what we needed to do was to come up with scenarios, sort of imagined interactions that were based in the research data. So we did that, scripted them, the film producer recruited actors, and they acted out the scenarios. We then got into all the business of, okay, let's have a look at what's that look like. Let's bring those back to the team. What do they think about it? Editing, working out how it all fits together. All this was new to us, and also writing a handbook to accompany the films. Launching the films, disseminating it, one such opportunity, and it reflecting and evaluating the whole process. I have described very briefly what was, as I say, a very complex process, a very demanding process, and for many of us, in different ways, a process that took us into uncharted territories. So what were the issues and challenges? time. The practitioners who joined the project, and as I say, at this point, it was a year's project to produce the learning resources. They thought a year to produce learning resources was an extraordinary amount of time in which to do it. We were actually terrified when we said it took us 3 years to do the research. There was this real mismatch in terms of the time that we thought it was actually going to involve. It felt very rushed for us. For the practitioners, it was a real challenge in terms of being able to sustain a commitment in this project. It demanded considerable input from, in particular, my colleague Lizzie Ward, who was working on this virtually full-time, in terms of going through the material we had, extracting material, preparing it, and then taking notes and doing follow-ups of discussion. We had a new team. We had a team that was partly a group of people who had worked together on research, but also had new members. We had to integrate the new and old members and try and establish effective working relationships. We had a task. We had this task of producing the resources at the same time as needing to maintain our commitment to ethical participatory practice. And this was an important one as well, given our focus on the significance of care, and given that some practitioners were saying care was a word that had been expunged from policy documents. Nobody was allowed to talk about care anymore. It was all about support, choice and control. We were actually challenging existing ways of thinking. I mean, one of the things we do, and I won't go into details a bit about this, but we have done an analysis of the transcripts of discussions to look at the different ways in which the idea of care was actually talked about in the group discussions, and there was sort of clear evidence of rather different ways of thinking about what care is. Practitioners, if you like, were talking about how to do care, whereas the older people were talking about the doing of and the experience of care. But there was some tensions around that. So if we were going to, through this process, achieve change through this process of deliberating together, bringing together university researchers, older people, practitioners, we realised that we needed to move beyond the idea of knowledge exchange, exchanging knowledge that we thought we already knew, to becoming engaged in something that was actually different and that in some way changed us all. So did we achieve that? And if so, how? I'm emphasising the positives. I don't want to suggest that there weren't any problems. There were. But I think what we came to as a result of this is the following that seemed to be particularly important. We were building on good relationships that had been established through working in the research. And whilst that could have meant it was really, really hard to involve the practitioners who came in and joined the team at that point, in fact, because there was evidence of these good relationships, it actually facilitated practitioners coming in. But for all of us, it required a preparedness to work outside the comfort zones of what we thought we already knew. Whether that be us as researchers saying, actually, hey, I haven't got a clue about how you make a film. Whether it be the practitioners' preparedness to say, well, I might have been working with older people for 20 years, but actually this is a way of working that I haven't experienced before, and I'm prepared to acknowledge that. And one of the things that became really important was to recognise that in working in this way together, we were all drawing on personal, political and professional identities and knowledge. The idea that older people have one set of knowledge, practitioners have another set of knowledge and researchers have another set of knowledge, how naive. So we needed to recognise not only the diversity of knowledges, but the fact that different people hold different knowledges. I said it sort of went more beyond a knowledge exchange, and I mean, the term moral deliberation sounds terribly fancy, but I mean, what people were doing was actually exploring issues of ethics, of what is the right thing to do, what is going to be good in this situation. And it's something that practitioners rarely have a space to do. And creating that space seemed to be important to people. It involved recognising the significance of our interdependence on each other and the importance of the relationships that we were able to establish together in order to achieve change. Now, my question, and I have some difference with a couple of my colleagues about this, is whether a factor that perhaps made it possible to do that within this group was that we all in some ways were prepared to recognise that ageing is a universal experience, in a way that it might be more difficult working with a group, say, of mental health service users, to say we may all experience mental health problems. Is it easier to say we are all growing older and therefore it might be easier to work in that way? I don't know, for discussion. We, as I say, we wanted to get feedback, and just some examples of some of the feedback that we got from those who took part. This first two from two of the older people who took part. I've been energised by being involved, all my past experiences being used. We heard about the importance of people being able to use their past experience from the peer facilitators. Asking other people what they need has opened my eyes, and I'm now aware of what's really out there. It's given me the confidence and knowledge that I can use in other places. And this was one of the women who, as I say, was 90 at the time we finished. The last few years working on this have been some of the best of my life. And from practitioners, a recognition from a voluntary sector worker saying, I've been wary of tokenism, but this piece of research has shown me what can be done by really involving older people. It's made me think about other ways in which my organisation can do this. And again, a manager from a statutory agency reflecting on the fact that I thought I already did this, but actually this is making me think again, and picking up the issue about time. One of the biggest challenges is that it's a slow process. So, we produced the film Learning Resources. They exist in DVD, but there are very few copies of those. They exist on a website. They're freely available for anybody who wants to use them. And in those learning resources, there is material both about the way in which we did the research together and also the active scenarios about applying findings about well-being to practice. So that's where they are on the website. Anybody would be very happy to access them. And I can't do this without acknowledging these are the people who did it with us, without whom it could not have happened. Thank you very much.